What's up, everybody? In this video we're going to be making this TV tray for my wife. It's a birthday gift. She's been wanting one for a while. So usually this is the only plan part of this. I made this MDF form because I knew I wanted to do like a bent wood curved thing so it could slide up under the couch and like pull all the way up to you while you're sitting there eating, as opposed to the standard TV trays where you have to kind of sit all the way on the edge of the couch or the chair or whatever. And it would have been way easier to do just like angled straight pieces, but I'd never done any kind of wood bending like this before, and so I wanted to try it. And what I'm putting together now is just, I did a quick little design in Illustrator and cut it out to make this like buck or mold or whatever you want to call it. It's just 3 sheets of 1/2-inch MDF, and I put holes in there for the clamps. And basically I'm just putting this together so that I can bend all the wood strips around it. Now, my wife doesn't like me to spend any money on her, but I do like to make her nice things. So this is probably the most horrible wood I had in the collection in my barn, and it sucked. And honestly, I wish I would have used something else, but it's cherry, it's super old, and I thought it might turn out nice, but it was just a lot of problems with it. You'll see soon. But I was basically just measuring my very scientific way of trying to figure out how long my strips need to be. And so I just measured around the mold just as an estimate, because I'm gonna make them extra long and then cut them off as I need to. But I'm gonna cut down these longer boards, and then I'm going to joint one edge of them. And normally when you're processing wood, you would say joint a flat, the big flat surface, and then turn that against the fence, and then join an edge, and then run it through a planer, and then do the top, and then run it through a table saw and do the other edge and get it all squared up and perfect. I wasn't 100% sure this was even going to work, so this was, at this point, it was kind of just like a test. So I jointed one edge so I can have a nice smooth edge to run against the table saw fence, and I'll worry about the flats and all that later, because I'm going to ultimately end up trimming these things down. So I wasn't too worried about how bad it looked. So on here, I first ripped that nasty outside edge off, and then each time I moved my fence over 1/4 of an inch, because my blade takes about an 1/8 inch. So then that left me with like an 1/8-inch strip. But as you can see, the strips right here, they are pretty rough. They're all checked and cracked, and they were in pretty bad shape. But I said, well, I don't know if this is going to work or not, so I need to try it. So I was kind of contemplating, trying this. If it doesn't work, then I'll just make like a squared off, nicer one. But I thought it would be really cool to have the bent wood one, and I figured she would like that. So this is at duct tape. It's the metal, like aluminum ducting tape for like HVAC duct work. And I figured it'd be nice to probably help it to have something that would kind of reinforce the outer edge of the strip and kind of maybe hold it and keep it from cracking or busting. I guess it helped, but I still had some problems, which I'll show in a minute. But here I've got the form held up, and I'm kind of trying to figure out where the center of this thing needs to be so I can start clamping. And I'm starting in the center, and I'm just working my way around. I'm alternating which side the clamps are on so it doesn't like pull the strips one way or the other. But it's pretty cool to see in this how you can see it slowly bending the shape. And I cannot explain how nervous I was that this whole thing was just gonna bust. It's sped up so you can't see my face, but I was definitely not enjoying it. But in the end, it did end up bending all the way around the form, and I was pleasantly surprised. There's probably things I could have done better, probably things I could have done differently, but this was the first time, and I just wanted to see how it would go. So now while that's drying, I have to actually replicate that 4 times for all 4 pieces, but while it's drying, I'm starting to process the wood for the top. And Again, to have some nicer wood would have been a whole lot easier and better, but this is what I had to work with. And so I cut down all those pieces, and these I am actually going to try to flatten because they were cut pretty bad, and since we're going to be using them as a tabletop, they need to be flat, obviously. So I'm just making some passes. Now I'm going to go back to our leg pieces, and you see pretty much all of them split. At some point I had to glue them and clamp them and get them back straight, but since those are dry, I'm going to joint one edge of those, and I'm not trying to get it perfectly flat because I'm going to end up passing it through the table saw on both sides, but there was varying thickness of the strips, so I just want to try to get it somewhat flat so that I have a flat surface to run through the table saw, which you'll see in a second. But don't copy this. I mean, I did it in as safe a manner as I know how, but don't copy me. If you do, I'm not liable. So here I've got the table saw set up, and that edge that I got relatively flat, it's against the fence, so I'm cutting off the other real jagged, kind of messed up edge here. And I've seen people do this kind of thing on the table saw. It's the first time I run a odd shaped piece like this through it, so it's a little bit nerve-wracking. And I always like to stand a little off to the side, so if it kicks it back or throws it or whatever, hopefully it'll miss me. It didn't in this case. Everything went pretty smooth, but I had to do this basically 8 times. I had to run each piece through twice to get it to the thickness that I wanted. And that crappy wood is going to come back and bite me yet again here. When I get the piece through and check it, there's some voids and things like that that didn't get pressed out, and you can see the look of defeat, if you want to call it that, on my face. But see there, lots of cracks and voids, and I ended up having to put more glue in there and clamp it tight. But anyways, in the end, I got all the voids out, and it worked out pretty good. So here, since I didn't have any plans or anything, I wasn't 100% sure, how long all these pieces needed to be. So I'm just kind of marking and kind of guesstimating. I end up going back multiple times and cutting them, trimming them a little bit at a time, until I get kind of the height that I was looking for. And when you don't have plans, that's what you got. I mean, you can't put wood back if you cut too much off, so I just trim a little bit off at a time and mock it up and see how it looks, and then trim a little bit more and mock it up, whatever. And trimming it's pretty easy because it did have that flat area, so I could hold it against the saw and trim a little bit off just like this here, go mock it up, trim a little bit more, whatever. So here you can see I trimmed quite a bit off one side of them, but I'm starting to get a little bit nervous because I'm thinking maybe I messed up on my angle or something, because this should be flat, but to get that flat and the bottom flat, it kicks this other edge out a good bit. So I wasn't sure maybe if I should have bent it more or what, but at this point I'm like, well, we're pretty invested, so we're just going to go with it and see what we're left with. So there will be a gap there, and in the end you'll see it didn't end up making that much of a difference. It looks almost like a design feature, but I would like for it to have been more flat. But to join those pieces together, I have a 1/4 inch bit in the router, and I'm cutting a slot in one side. So one side, say like the top leg of the table will have a slot, and then the bottom leg will have 2 holes so the bolts can go through. So I didn't want both pieces slotted because adjusting it would be more aggravating that way. But basically I run the 1/4 inch bit, take little bites, raise the bit some, make a path, raise it some, make a cut, until I eventually come all the way out the top. As you can see, this is the last pass on this one. So once I do that, that will allow the bolt to pass through, but then I need to make room for the head of the bolt so it sits flush in there. And so I swapped out the 1/4 inch bit for a 1/2 inch bit in the router, and instead of a nice shot showing the thickness of the bolt head and how I'm lining up with the router bit, you get to see my pinky. So that was a win for that shot. But basically, it's the depth of the head of the bolt. And then once I route that groove in the same spot, you can see we have like 2 grooves, and then so the bolt head sits flush in the wood. So that worked out pretty good. And that will allow the piece to slide up and down for adjustment. So this was the first time that I put it together, mocked it up, and this is probably the first time that I've actually felt pretty confident that this thing might turn out. I was thinking once I put the weight of the top on there, it should bend it, let it flex a little bit, and it should be pretty much level. So that was a point at which I was like, yeah, this might work. So now I'm getting the wood prepped for the top. These pieces were like 8 inches or something like that. I cut them all down to 6 inches because I wanted the top to be 18 inches wide. And so I ripped these 3 to 6 inches, and now I'm just going to cut them in half. I was going to do this on the bandsaw, but my bandsaw is not that accurate, and sometimes it cuts like pie shapes, and I mean it's not the best for resawing like this. So I'm just using the table saw, and basically I'll set the blade up to exactly half the thickness of the boards, and then run it a little bit at a time up each side, and be sure to keep the flattest side next to the fence, because I didn't have these perfectly flat because my drum sander back there behind me actually broke, so I wasn't able to get them all the way flat. But basically keep cutting them until they get thinner, and then that's a glue up. Both panels are glued in there. Those clamps are actually pretty nice. They're kind of like the Rockler panel clamps, but they're much cheaper. I'll include a link down below if anybody's interested in those. But they did a great job of gluing up panels. They're pretty adjustable. But here you can see both panels. They're relatively flat. They're not perfect because I didn't have the wood perfect. You can see all the table saw marks and stuff. But how I dealt with that is I routed a channel on each side so that the legs of the wood could sit flush in the channel. So I'll show in just a second here. It doesn't matter if the bottom is perfectly flat. I can have a surface that I know is perfectly flat that the leg will sit in. So if that makes sense. So like the leg will sit in that groove and kind of lock itself in, and then the panel, you can see that's far from perfectly flat, but it doesn't matter because that channel was flat where the leg sits. So that was just a way of kind of speeding things up. I didn't have to sand as much, and that's the underside, so it didn't really matter. So that's just a little tip for that. Now sanding, you can see I love sanding. This is my happy sanding face, and there was a lot of sanding on this job, and I was just thoroughly enjoying it. But this here is the first time I've actually had it together, and it's dry fit, and it's looking like it's going to work out. So I was pretty happy at this point, and all that was left to do really is final sand it and put some finish on it. This was definitely challenging, definitely put me out of my comfort zone, which I like to do a lot of times because you get bored just making the same thing over and over again. But you can see here it is all the way complete. The base, it'll slide up under the couch, and it actually is sitting up just a little bit, like it's not perfectly level, but when you add a little bit of weight to it, there's that springiness, so it kind of holds it down level. So I think it turned out great. It was definitely fun to challenge myself, and that's pretty much it. See you on the next one.